So, Dom, the White House Correspondents Dinner. Did you watch?
No, you
Oh,
know
I
I
love
didn't
the
watch it.
giggle. You're just like, as if. No.
No, you know I didn't watch that.
Are you one of those, like, I'll watch when they
Ugh.
invite me kind of people?
Yeah. I didn't think about that. Um, even then I might, you know what? I would then. I would.
Well, you're there.
I'd record it. I'd record it. It's usually, I don't know. I've never been a big fan of it. It feels sometimes, I listen, good for the people who are part of it. I just, A, usually we're working, and B, I sometimes just find it kind of performative, but
Well, listen, it was a little different this year because, of course, they canceled the comedian host.
yeah, yes, did hear about that. Know about that.
Oh, everybody heard about that, and we're going to
Yes.
talk about it. So let's start the show. Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Dom. You know what's funny? Not long ago, we were both breaking news. Now we're
Breaking unemployment records.
exactly just like thousands of other journalists who've been laid off from newsrooms across the country.
Yeah, and after the shock wore off, we kept asking ourselves, what the hell do we do now?
And over many, many cups of coffee,
And maybe a few drinks.
we realized we had a unique opportunity here. Why not pull back the curtain on what's really happening in American media?
Right? I mean, we've spent years in this industry seeing how stories get made or don't, and now we can actually talk about it.
And trust me, there's a lot to talk about. From local news disappearing to social media reshaping journalism, we'll break it all down.
And look, we're not here to lecture anybody. We just want to help make sense of the information that we're getting and maybe have some much needed fun along the way.
So whether you're glued to the news, just trying to figure out what's real in your feed, or curious about the future of media, come hang with us.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking, a podcast where two journalists
Are taking a critical look at American media.
So, according to the White House Correspondents Association, the organization that puts out the annual event, they canceled their plans to have comedian Amber Ruffin host or MC the night's festivities. So, they usually have a comedian or somebody come in and roast, and I mean cook the
Yes.
press, the president, the administration, everything, but mostly the commander in chief takes most of the heat, and let's just say not everybody has a sense of humor about themselves.
Some are a little sensitive.
Some people are
Some are a little
sensitive.
sensitive. It's the
Got
best part
feelings.
of the damn thing, though. I mean, come on.
It's
Without
those are the
that,
clips that make the rounds.
yeah.
It's not the awards or anything
No,
else. It's like how hard did they go at the president? And we've seen
exactly.
all kinds of presidents. And listen, again, like I said, some of them have a sense of humor about themselves, but not everybody.
No.
So anyway, so the gig cancellation heard across the country. Basically, after that happened, Amber, of course, made the talk show rounds, and she sat down with the, let's be real here, the very liberal-leaning late night bastion, The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and she said that she had been asked to make jokes about quote unquote both sides, the infamous both sides that people seem to be getting sick of. And she was just like, I can't do that when one side is disappearing people off the street.
I thought if they didn't want me doing that show before I had even opened my mouth, then they would have been really, really sad with what they got.
Out of your mouth.
Yeah. I mean, and then also after they fired me, I looked back at my Google Doc and was like, this would have been bad. They would not have liked it.
So when the dinner finally gets underway and we heard an impassioned defense of the Fourth Estate from the Correspondents Association president, Eugene Daniels, who really just came out and he was like, listen, journalism is an example of American exceptionalism, and he laid out the reasons why.
As the media landscape has changed, as technology has changed, our association has evolved with it. We journalists are a lot of things. We are competitive and pushy, we are impatient, and sometimes we think we know everything. But we're also human. We miss our families and significant life moments in service to this job. We care deeply about accuracy and take seriously the heavy responsibility of being stewards of the public's trust. What we are not is the opposition. What we are not is the enemy of the people, and what we are not is the enemy of the state.
But also at the Correspondents' Dinner, Alex Thompson, you know who he is, right? He's the national political
Yep.
correspondent for Axios, blah blah blah. Okay,
Axios.
so he got the Aldo Beckman Award for overall excellence, and again, kudos to him.
Kudos.
Yes, and for White House coverage, basically. But at the same time, what I thought was so interesting was that he used his acceptance speech to point out that White House coverage has fallen short of its true goal.
One serious note. To my bones, I believe that reporting and the White House Correspondents Association is as necessary as ever. President Biden's decline and its cover-up by the people around him is a reminder that every White House, regardless of party, is capable of deception. But being truth tellers also means telling the truth about ourselves. We, myself included, missed a lot of this story, and some people trust us less because of it. We bear some responsibility for faith in the media being at such lows.
So having said all of that, especially with what Alex said at the end. I mean, listen, Amber made an excellent point. Eugene made a great point. That's the whole point of our podcast. But with what Alex said at the end, is that why, let's say, the public is starting to trust comedians more than they trust journalists?
I do. Listen, you know how I felt. We've discussed this before, like what Alex Thompson had to say about how the media covered the Biden administration. And you know how I felt about that, I've been saying this for a long time. And we've
had people on the show talk about this. I mean, one of the questions that I believe, and I'm now blanking on who it was that I asked, but I did ask the question of
we talked to Ellis about it. Ellis
yes,
Hennigan.
that they never ask each other's follow-up questions. They don't support each other, or at least not from what I can see in those press conferences.
And I think, this is the hard part sometimes, that when you feel you're under attack, and at the same point, you can criticize your own people and say, hey, listen, we have places we can be getting better at, or things that we make mistakes at. But the problem is sometimes you feel like, because you're under attack, you feel like, I don't want to talk about that other shit. Because if we do start to talk about it, then we're piling on ourselves, that we're diminishing our trust. But the reality is, I think if you don't acknowledge the mistakes that have been made, then how do you ever really move forward? How does the public ever trust you if you don't take that ownership of what was done wrong? And it can't just be, listen, I appreciate what Alex said there, but I also know he's got a book that that's coming out soon, if it's not already out, with Jake Tapper. And part of their book is about this. So there is something, you know what I mean? But I appreciate that it's being said. And I think journalists, you have comedians who don't have this. They play by different rules, and they can come out and give commentary, and they can be as biased. And people say, well, they're a comedian, but they do have that opportunity, I think, to really build a much more authentic relationship with the audience than sometimes a journalist. Because a journalist, you're thinking about, well, I want to make sure I'm being fair. I don't want to cut out, are we, in a sense, Jenna, are we overthinking it as journalists?
Well, I was going to say, comedians also don't have, editors. And listen, when they put out their comedy shows or whatever it is, I don't think that the owners of the media outlets are coming in and being like, yeah, you can't say this, you can't say that. Yet at the same time, when it comes to journalism, we're already seeing stories, or we've reported on stories about how owners of some newspapers have come in and said, yeah, we're not going to publish that.
It's interesting because, remember, there have been some comics who've been called out for their stories not being, let's say, fact-based, and people holding them to different.
But nobody expects a comic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I guess it interests me, though, because is that changing also? Do people perceive now that comics have gone more into that news space, more into dealing with political aspects? Is there now more of a, more expectations on, well, we're going to start fact checking you too now if you're going to be making political jokes. I think places like The Daily Show, John Oliver, they really do stick to making sure whatever material they're using is fact-based. They're acting as journalists in many ways, but use comedy as a way of kind of to point out the absurdity of the material. Sometimes like, can you believe what these assholes just said? Could you believe that they said this shit?
Okay,
Does
wait
this
a
make
second. I
sense?
just want you to take for a second and imagine if like the anchors on any cable news network were able to honestly
I
say that.
I am
The
here
ratings
for
would
it.
go through the roof.
I am here for it.
Like if we could
Maybe we need
all,
them.
and all those many times when we've seen that zero expression look on Wolf Blitzer's face, I would love for him to just be like, "Look, y'all."
Well, Jenna, let's keep this all like we've worked with each other in different stories. I mean, let's keep this real. Our conversation of me working as a producer and researching the story and writing certain things out, and then you writing and also looking at what's happening in news space. Like there are plenty of times how we present the information is very different than how we talk personally behind the scenes.
Of course.
Because we're going to be like,
Of
are we
course.
serious? Are we serious right now? Is this what's happening? Like, is any, and it's,
Well, when you're taking that, like, right down the middle, I don't
mhm,
have an opinion about any of this. These are just the facts kind of way, then yeah, that's what you end up with is something that can be incredibly bland and can lack,
um,
sometimes the urgency of the moment.
the emotion of what you really feel is happening. And I know people could say, well, news isn't about emotion, but that's actually kind of bullshit. I mean, news is always trying to tap into emotion. They want you to care. They either want, I mean, most news that we see on air, especially on cable news, I should say, I'm speaking mostly to like television aspect of it all, but it's when you think about, or even online, they're there to catch your attention, like breaking news. This is happening. You don't know it. You got to know it. Most times it's negative. Most times it's some kind of tragedy. It's some kind of like scandal. Like it's always something that veers more into the negative space. And so you are playing with emotions, really. The thing is, you don't want to necessarily give the anchor or the people that ability to come across as this is their personal opinion, but we're always giving some kind of opinion.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, even with print media, not necessarily with straight reporting, again, there is a clear responsibility with straight reporting, but when it comes to op-ed pages, that's nothing but emotion
It's, but
intended to get you to click.
And mostly, Jenna, really what we've discussed, right? A lot of people, those lines have gotten blurred, either A, media literacy of people not understanding that also,
Correct, correct.
but also there's media organizations also that are kind of blurring that line because they do know
Intentionally.
that's what gets the clicks, right? Even the headlines sometimes do not match what the story, or it doesn't exactly, it dramatizes, it gets you to want to click, you know? So we're always playing with that. But again, I find it interesting that sometimes comedy news outlets are almost feeling more responsible in terms of how they want to make sure the information is getting, getting to the people.
Yeah, no. I mean, I've seen numerous times where Daily Show correspondents have turned up
Yeah.
on legacy news outlets, sort of being like, okay, so you were out talking to the public. What is it that you were finding? And they were like, I was just pointing out the irony of like you saying one thing, but you supporting somebody who does another. Well, anyway, so with all of that though, there is a very real question about the role that comedy is playing in the news that at least Americans are consuming.
Mhm.
And so with that, we went to somebody who has run several comedy shows. Nobody pulls in loyal viewers like late night comedy shows, so much so that people, more often than not, get their news from late night comedy shows over news shows. So, what makes comedians a more trusted source of news over traditional journalism? To help us parse out the secret sauce is someone who's worked in the industry for over 2 decades. He was a former senior producer for The Daily Show, Jon Stewart, producer for Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and executive producer of Full Frontal with Samantha Bee. We are so glad to welcome Pat King. Pat, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's just start off with I'd say the headline question here. Why, in your opinion, do most people trust comedians over traditional journalists?
I think, like, to boil it down, it's authenticity. There's something about, listening to Jon Stewart and, like, he's playing a character, but the character is only about 10% more than what he actually is. It really is what he believes. And, when you watch John Oliver, you can say that guy really believes what he's saying. Colbert really believes what he's saying. Kimmel, when he gets emotional talking about his son, really believes what he's saying. This morning, I was watching a CNN package where a CNN host was like reporting on an auto show, and she's just like sitting in this like made up shot inside a car, and then she gets up and starts walking around, and the whole thing just felt fake, like there was no authenticity to it. That's, you go back to like Cronkite and you look at him and you go, that's a dude that was either telling you what he believed or was just telling you what was happening. And I think we've really lost that. There's like become such an artifice to news that comedy actually makes people sort of believe what a person is saying. And I can say, as having worked in news and comedy, we have much larger research and producing staffs than a lot of news shows do.
I'm sorry, that's so wild to me.
I mean, at last week tonight, we had what, 7 or 8 producers that were working for 3 weeks on one of the long segments, and then you also had an army of researchers that were hired from journalism that were helping you put the whole piece together. And it's like there's so much more rigor that I've seen in comedy trying to get it right, because if you fuck up and get it wrong,
Mhm.
then you've lost everything.
Mhm.
And I've seen it happen. And it's almost like people care a little bit more in comedy to get it right, because you can become an unreliable narrator very quickly.
I mean, unfortunately, I think that's what's happened with a lot of our business. Very quickly, though, Dom, because again, most of my working news experience has been in public media, shoestring budget. So there's not always a lot. But have you ever worked on a show where there were that many producers and researchers?
No, no,
This is what I'm saying.
no. When I worked in cable news, you're lucky. I mean, honestly, it was just us. There might have been a handful, like 3 people, 4 people working on a show, and that's
Yeah.
including whoever. And you're lining the show too. Like that, and you're doing day to day. It was not unusual to have that.
And
I
it
always
fries your brain.
and it fries your brain. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm curious. Like going back to the whole issue of authenticity, why is it that in some ways, it feels kind of on this end of it, it's like it's kind of feels kind of fucked up in a way that comedians get to be authentic and who they are, and then the journalists don't. You don't feel that sense that they really can be. And I don't know where it shifted, because you mentioned Walter Cronkite, but I do think, like, I don't know what's shifted within that world of where all of a sudden people who work news felt like they have to play almost a character and also not be who
Yeah.
they are.
There was like a weird shift. I always call it the Blitzer effect. There was like a weird shift in the mid-aughts where like when Blitzer started the Situation Room, and this is not it wasn't completely created by him, because obviously
Mhm.
Crossfire before that and stuff like that, but he created this world where talking about politics was talking about politics, not policy.
Mhm.
And like even this morning I saw him on TV and he was talking about immigration stuff, and he said, well, is it possible that your party has the wrong messaging on this? And I was like, what are you talking about messaging? This guy got rounded up from Maryland and sent to El Salvador. Who cares about messaging? What matters is trying to get this guy back from El Salvador. And so it's like, but that's sort of like infected all of at least cable news to me. And that's why, like, I love podcasts now. I listen to podcasts so much more than I watch cable news because, again, there's like a level of authenticity. Even if you don't like Joe Rogan, you can't say that he's not being authentic.
No, absolutely. And
Mhm.
I would add to that that as a former state house reporter, that's part of the reason, in my opinion, why communicating policy and
Yes.
communicating, like wonky policy stuff can be such a disinterested turnoff to the public because they're so used to talking about, again, the soap opera drama of politics
Right.
that when it comes to the actual policy that's going to affect your life, meh.
But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know I don't know. I 100% agree with that because I do
Okay.
think that people do. I mean, if you look at the protests that have been happening at all these town halls, like people are protesting on policy. It's not just like they are seeing what is happening in the government now, and they are protesting not on the soap opera of it all. They're protesting on the policies that are being enacted. And so I think people are more interested in policy than people in news give them credit for.
Ah.
That's just me. And maybe it's just because I'm a policy nerd, but I do think that like I really do think that there's a hunger for it. And there's like, even if it's a niche thing, it's not getting filled right now. Um, and I don't mean to like pick on Wolf Blitzer. He seems like a very nice guy. I mean, his turtles Instagram stuff it's very sweet. But I just think that it's done a lot of bad. I mean, it's like if on cable news, like Stephanie Rule, she comes off as incredibly authentic. Like you watch her, she gets emotional about things. She gets into stories that most people aren't covering. And I think that like she's one of the few sort of bright spots in cable news. But other than that, it's like, kind of a desert out there. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's my
no, I
that's my
totally,
TED talk.
no, that part I totally agree. Maybe it's the delivery system or something, but that was just something that always used to drive me bananas. Maybe it's
Yeah,
more local politics that I'm thinking of, but
maybe.
trying
Yeah,
to
I don't
get
know.
that traction was always, it was never quite there. Anyway, moving on though. So when it comes to working on a comedy late night show that's covering current events,
Mhm.
who's doing the journalism and who's writing the jokes? Is that the same group of people or these different groups of people? Like you mentioned, having such access to, researchers and producers and all these people trying to get it right. Is that in addition to or separate from the people writing the actual jokes?
So it's largely it's different show to show. So I can only speak from my experience, but it's largely you have a team of researchers and producers that are doing like the real deep dive research. And they sort of take that and give it to the writers and will often put together like a narrative and be like, here's what I think would be a good narrative. You can use it or not use it. And then the writers will put in the jokes. And also lots of times, the researchers and producers are funny too. So they'll have joke suggestions and, you know, certain writers are persnickety about that. They don't like other people trying to pitch them jokes. And some will be like, that's a good joke. Put it in. Um, so it's the teams both work together. Like I've definitely had a lot of writers that would do their own research. And then, the only problem on the back end is you have to double check that their research was correct research and not just like we found this random thing on Google. Um, so, but usually it is it's researchers and producers give the information to the writers, and the writers take that information and write the jokes. That's like the standard way that it's done. At least at the three late night shows that I've worked on.
Okay. Well, would you say that there's a difference? One of the conversations that I've heard around comedy come up a lot is this notion of punching up or punching down, and that what makes a good comic, what makes a good joke that everybody can get behind is that you're punching up as opposed to punching down on someone, which perhaps more some other comics think is more funny, even though that seems to be off-putting to some of the public.
Yeah, I think, when the idea of punching down is like when you're making fun of somebody that is in a lower status than you. And punching up is the idea that you're taking on a power struggle. You're taking on the people that are in power that are doing stuff to us. So like a good example of like punching down is like making jokes about people that go to Applebee's. And and I'm not kidding. Like I've had this fight with people that were like, I was like, we can't do that. People like Applebee's, and it is a place that you can get like an affordable, fun night out with your family. Like, let's not make fun of that. Like, there's something great about that. Um, but like punching up is taking on somebody bigger than yourself. And that's what I think like the Daily Show now in its newest iteration has been doing such a great job. Like not just John on Mondays, which is great,
Hmm.
but also like um the rest of the week. Like they're firing on like all pistons right now. And Oliver also does such a great job with it. I miss Sam being on the air because she was just fearless. She just didn't care. Part of that's probably because she's a Canadian citizen, so she knew she had an out.
I mean, it's nice to know.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean it's you never want to look like you're picking on people that can't help themselves. You
Mm.
always want to take on bigger power. Does any of that make sense?
No,
Mhm.
I think it does. And I'm also wondering when it comes to punching up, because as I, was rethinking about a lot of the stuff that I find funny, is it more about hitting at an individual or an institution or a system that that individual is a representative of? Because there's always jokes about whoever the president is. And yes, sometimes it'll be about that individual. But sometimes it's also about the institution that said individual is representing and what that institution is doing.
Yeah, I mean it's I will say like working at full frontal when Trump was like running in 2016 before he won,
Mm,
we made a lot of like, you know, orange Dorito skin jokes, stuff like that. But then once he was actually in office in 2017, we realized that it was the people around him that were more interesting. So we did a lot more pieces around, like when you say like the institutions, like we did a
hmm.
lot more pieces around the people that were facilitating what he was doing, as opposed to necessarily getting him. Um, because it got boring. Like there's only so much you can make fun of him. I mean, especially physically, like whatever. He's whatever.
Yeah.
It is what it is. But it was much more interesting to do a deep dive into like Stephen Miller's background or into Steve Bannon's background or, like getting to the heart of, I mean, for me, this was a thing that I never got on the show, but I really wanted to. But the fact that Steve Mnuchin was a producer on the Justice League movie where they literally blow up Congress, I was like,
I
there's,
miss that detail.
yeah, I was like, there's something there that is very funny about the fact that Steve Mnuchin literally blew up Congress. I don't know. There was just like, but that was the thing. There was so much stuff during that time. You couldn't fit it all in. And like, I really enjoyed the time at that show before Trump was elected because we were able to we did a two-part series on the history of the far right and how they created abortion as a movement.
Mm.
And it was a great series and it was focusing on how like they realized that like anti-segregation was not a winning argument anymore, and so they sort of needed something new and moved into the abortion world. And it was just like, boiling it down, but it was basically that. And we had like people that were in the movement at that time, and it was just fascinating stuff that we just once the Trump administration got going, we just didn't have time for anymore.
It's kind of interesting because SNL recently did a skit on about White POTUS, making fun of the series White Lotus, and they did that whole skit where they kind of were making fun of Trump. Then one portion of the, I don't know if you saw this,
I
Pat, but
didn't know.
you didn't. So they did actually, they were doing a skit about, it was all the Trump administration people playing parts in White Lotus. And what they ended up doing was one of the characters, they basically made fun of her. One of the actors, they made fun of her physical appearance, and it was so unusual because she went on social media and said, listen, I get it, it's a comedy show, but usually you guys punch up, and
Yeah.
instead you punch down on me. And I think that, that was what was surprising as I was watching, like, ouch, like everybody else in that show was a Trump administration person, and you're making fun of them, trying to tie them into the whole aspect of White Lotus. And you have one actor who's featured in that series, and you make fun of their physical appearance.
Yeah.
It didn't make any sense. And I wonder if, in a way, some of these comedy shows, and I get it, there is so much to talk about with Trump in office. It just can be a little frustrating because you feel like something is getting lost. There are other stories too that are getting lost within that world that people aren't paying attention to because
Yeah.
you're so focused on, and that goes for and that goes for news, traditional news also, not just comedy news. Do you feel that? Do you sense like there's been a bit, maybe, I don't want to say like, you people should be ignoring what's happening, but is it almost too much of a focus on what's happening with the administration?
Well, the first thing I would say is you mentioned like stories that get missed.
Yeah.
And that does happen a lot because at the end of the day, you need to make it funny. And there are definitely times that there are stories that it's just like, I can't figure out how to make this funny. And so you end up not covering it. Like, and like there have definitely been times where people come up with like a workaround to like not really write a joke. But to make something feel silly, but like not really write a joke. But like generally it's if something is so dark that you can't figure out how to make it funny, it's probably not going to end up on the show.
Oh.
And so that is where stories fall through the cracks from time to time. But I'm sorry, what was the rest of your question?
I guess, are there other important stories that are, people are so focused on the Trump
Oh, so
administration? Are
focused
there
on-
other, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. But it's also like, they're like climate change does not show up on comedy shows very often. And I'll tell you why. It is, you can do an entire special on climate change and it will end up being the lowest rated show you do of the year. And
Wow.
I know that because we did it at Full Frontal. We did an entire show on climate change. We had Ingrid Michaelson come on and like rewrite one of her songs and like perform it. It was like a whole spectacle. It was our lowest rated show of the year. So there is also like these shows are still shows. Like as activisty as they can feel from time to time, like they are still shows on networks that need to make money. So there are like things that do fall through the cracks from time to time. And it's, largely because it's either you can't figure out how to make it funny, or it's a thing that it just doesn't rate.
Well, speaking of, like figuring out how to make it funny and all the different like moving parts that you have. So, can you give us an idea of how you sort of like structure an episode of one of these shows? Because, I mean, again, as a journalist, I find myself getting so quickly sucked in, which is different from the way I engage with a news show where I'm making a conscious effort to pay attention more often than not. This just sucks me right in.
Well, I mean, you got to think of it act to act. Like, I think like Oliver doesn't have ad breaks, so you can sort of like put him off to the side.
That also helps.
But every other show does. And so when you think about it, it's like the Daily Show is structured. The first act is headlines, news of the day. The second act is usually either a field piece or a sketch that they've shot. And then the third act is an interview. And then fourth act is moment of zen. So that's just sort of like, that's the structure of that show. And it doesn't really change. unless something crazy happens. That's generally the structure of the show. Sam's show was kind of similar. It was first act was news of the week. Second act was almost always a field piece. Um, well, no, I'm sorry. Second act was usually another headline, but was sort of our like Oliver version of a deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
Third act would be a field piece, and we didn't have interviews on that show. So it just sort of depends on what the host wants to do. Like Sam just didn't want to do live interviews. And she was like, I'd like to sit down and interview people, but I just don't really want to do it, you know,
Night after night after
two
night after night.
and like two people at a desk, sort of old school style. Like we consciously kind of tried to like change the format because we were like, what the Daily Show and Oliver were parodying was like the old school nightly news format of like man behind desk with over the shoulder graphic. And we were sort of like, it feels a little tired. Let's try something a little bit different. So instead, we got rid of the desk. When we were doing test shoots, she was in like a dress that was so tight it looked like duct tape around her, and,
That
and
might have
heels.
been the style at one point in the aughts.
Yes, but also like she was wearing heels and it was like poking holes in this set. And after we did our first test show, she was like, "I'm doing blazer and sneakers. I don't care what anybody says." And that's when the style changed, and we were like, "Okay, cool. No desk. It's her standing up, monitors behind her, like all the like we didn't do really over the shoulder graphics. We did like graphics in the monitors, and it was like trying to just like change the format a little bit because what the other shows were parodying is not a format that people really watch anymore. And so we were sort of like, we don't really need to parody anything. We're just doing our own thing. Um, and I'm not saying it was better than anything else at all. I mean, like, obviously it still works great for the Daily Show and for Oliver, but like it was just a thing that we felt like we wanted to do something a little bit new and a little bit different. It was almost more based on like a BBC style.
Yeah.
The way that like a lot of the BBC is like a person standing in front of monitors, not necessarily behind a desk and doing like, walks with the camera and stuff like that. And we really tried to mimic some of that and like, but not to make fun of it. It was just to be like, that's a cool look. We like that. Let's do that.
Well, no, because here's what I find so interesting that I'm really engaging with, and that is the fact that first and foremost, you guys clearly had more money than the average news department did. Again, priorities. And then secondly, you also had a lot more freedom, it sounds like, to determine what the show is going to look like and how it was going to move. And as audience attention spans and what audiences are looking for changes, I'm wondering if that kind of maybe a little bit more opening up and giving creative control to people in news departments is necessary because, again, the same old same, it ain't working.
It's 100%. And like, I mean, I can tell you this. I won't say exactly what the show was, but I interviewed for a show and I'd been watching I knew that the host had been on other shows. So I watched a bunch of her stuff and came up with a bunch of like show title ideas that I was like, well, this is good. She said this, that could be a cool title and da da da. And then when I did the interview, I was like trying to pitch some of these ideas. And the guy I was interviewing with was like, no, it's just called like Now. I'm like,
Sorry, that's hitting a little close to home for a bunch of different reasons.
but I was just like, but I was like, you have an opportunity. You've got a great host. You've got an opportunity to do something new, something fun. And I was just like, all right, whatever. But
Knowing
yeah,
to throw in the towel.
but it is so true that it's like, there's some places that are starting to do it a little bit, but like, but being able to give people creative control of their own show and let them have their own voice is so important. Like John, when he started at the Daily Show, definitely, it was a show that was very writer controlled in the Kilborn era. And John had his own vision for what he wanted the show to be. But it took a couple years for him to really get there. But once he got there, especially once you hit like 2002, around the lead up to the Iraq War, you really feel his specific voice come out.
Mm-hmm.
And it never shifted from there. Like, it just grew. It was just more like, as the show went on, he got better and better at honing what it was he wanted to do. And also, like, our technology changed. At the time, in the late 90s, if they needed a soundbite, they were literally laying it off to VHS. And then by the time you get to 2010, we've got a digital system that's recording all of these shows, and you can clip stuff and send it directly to an editor, and it made it so that you could do these like big Fox News montages and things like that we weren't able to do in the earlier days. But it was like, so there was a technology shift at the same time that he really was able to express his voice. And it's not that he didn't have the voice, he just had to like kind of like wait and like move certain people out, move certain people in, and create a whole new structure that wasn't there before.
You talked about technology though there, Pat. Like, there's something called Snapstream. Could you give a little bit of could you give a little bit of about what that tool is and how that changed the game for a lot of the shows?
So in 2010 we got Snapstream at the show. And basically what it is it sort of combines like a Google search, a Nexus search, and a DVR into one system. And so it's recording video and getting transcripts that are searchable. And you can then very easily pull up a clip. You can, like you do on Google, you just put in search terms and it pulls everything up, and you can mark an in, mark an out, send it to an editor can cut it within minutes. Whereas, it used to be, we would have to sit at our desk, do a Nexus search, find the transcript, and then go over to a TiVo, fast forward to find the exact moment, lay it off to a beta tape, hand it to an editor. Like, it was like,
no, that sounds like minutes. The resources that most newsrooms have. And one of the things that I used to hear sometimes from viewers, at least, was, oh, this person came on your show and they said they never X, Y, and Z, but then I watched the comedy show where they clip, why is the comedy show doing a better job? And I'm like, they have resources we don't.
No, it's true. I mean, it was like and I took it for granted. When I was at the Daily Show, like, I was just like, why doesn't it? Of course everybody has this. Why not? And then I went to news and I was like, oh, nobody has this.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's interesting. But it's interesting that it's interesting because you get that expectation though that the audience really does have a higher expectation of what satirical news shows are actually doing, and in a way, y'all are taking it upon yourselves too to be like, where there is almost more of an expectation of that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and that kind of gets back to what I was saying before about why these shows are so careful to not get things wrong. And like, I can say just from experience, like, when we got things wrong, the next night we apologized on air, and that's another thing that you don't necessarily see all that often on a lot of news shows. We did get an apology from Sean Hannity one time, which was fun. But
what happened? Can you explain what happened there? I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, it was this is going back like 15 years, but my friend Ramin, who still works with the show, was watching Hannity for some segment, and he was like, Pat, he's like, something doesn't feel right. It's this Michelle Bachmann speech out front of Congress, and it didn't seem like it was like there were that many people there, but they're showing this B-roll that shows thousands and thousands of people. And I looked at it and I was like, oh yeah, that's the Glenn Beck 912 rally. I was like, it's a different rally that they're showing B-roll of. And so we showed it to John, and he was just like, holy shit. Because we were able to pull up the footage from the 912 rally, and I recognized it because they were flying all the "Don't Tread on Me" flags.
Right.
And I was like, that's a big Glenn Beck thing. So we pulled it up and we aired it on the show that night, and then Hannity apologized the next night.
Wow.
But it was funny because I was like, that was a choice.
Hmm.
You didn't accidentally pull B-roll from 3 months before. Like somebody made a choice to go in and switch that B-roll. Um, it seems quaint now, but like at the time, that was a big deal.
And it's a big, it's no,
It
it's a
is,
big deal
it should
now.
be a big deal. Yeah.
It's a big deal because I think that goes back to like what people, what you expect from news. And it's interesting because like had that been the Daily Show, the news outlets would have been all over the Daily Show for doing something like that. They would have been, look at
Yeah.
that. They're the liberal bias. So it's kind of like there's even more. The thing for me is like there should be even more accountability on the
Yeah.
news, the traditional news. And everybody should be. If you're using news as a source of your content, you should be telling the truth, or there should be
Yeah.
some truth based in it, or else what's the point? Or else we could just all lie and just make fun of things. So,
Another great version of that was another Glenn Beck related thing
oh boy.
was there was the I forget what the exact story was, but it was something with Turkey sending a boat to Gaza, and the IDF got involved. But anyhow, so whatever it was, Glenn Beck was just like, you're just going to see this here. You're not going to see this on the evening news tonight. Nobody's going to show you that. And the next morning, I just went through like every late night or every like news show and pulled clips. And I was like, it's on this show. It's on this show. It's on this show. It's on this show. So we were able to show like, no, Glenn Beck, it actually was on every show.
Well, listen, not to be the corporate wet blanket here, but there has been, I believe, the court excuse that everybody knows that, Sean Hannity or Glenn Beck or what, those shows, that's not news. That's just
Their
opinion.
opinion.
That's entertainment too. So
Yeah.
just that was what people were also saying after
Yeah.
the fact when those shows got hauled into court.
Well, that was one of my favorite things was when Fox News had to put out, they were like, yes, we are the Fox News channel, but from 6 to 9 in the morning, we are opinion. From 9
Yes.
to noon, we are news.
Yes.
From noon to 3, we are news. And after that, we are opinion. It's like, so
And you should totally
you're
know
like
that.
6 hours of news out of a 24-hour day.
But you know what's frustrating about that? Listen, I worked at Fox in the early aughts, and I always felt like I worked for like John Kasich's show, and I also worked for Geraldo's show too, and a few others. I would help out, for me, it was always about, as a producer, again, it goes back to always wanting to make sure, even if your opinion, that you're putting out the truth. You never want to
Right.
mislead your audience. You know what I mean? Like saying your opinion isn't a cover for misleading anyone. Saying your opinion isn't a cover for I can put misinformation out. So I think that's really important that even when we say things like opinion, you're still beholden to telling the truth.
Well, that's what I think is one of the biggest problems we've seen recently is like the fracturing of what truth is. We used to always have sort of like a baseline, like we all watched whatever it was, NBC, CBS, ABC, and then we built our opinions off of the same facts. And you could build different opinions, but we came from the same factual area.
Right.
Now, facts are just so disaggregated that it's like it's sort of impossible to, you turn on Fox News and it's just a completely different universe than when you watch CNN. And CNN, I don't even think is like a left-wing channel. They just report.
Yeah.
And they don't always get it right, but
Mhm.
but the other people are just in a completely different world. And like I actually really enjoy watching Trump talk about this stuff. This is just my own personal thing because he's so far down that hole that when he says things, he's like, you know what? And I gotta say, the other day I heard something about Hunter Biden's laptop from hell. And I'm like, if you're not steeped in this shit, Hunter Biden's laptop from hell is nobody knows what that means. Like, but he's so steeped in it. But I see it with so many people that are just like so far down that rabbit hole that I'm like, dude, you guys need like an intervention. Like somebody needs to step in and be like, this is like whatever you're watching, whatever you're listening to is just, I don't know. I don't even know where to go because they're going to say that like, well, we'll look at MSNBC. And I'm like, MSNBC is different. They're not the same as Fox. And I hate when people try and correlate the two.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that I think MSNBC is great. I've actually stopped watching it mostly, but they are much more fact-based than Fox is nowadays. And even if they are a liberal opinion network, at least at night, they are not in any way the same thing. Doesn't mean that they're, well, no, they are better. They're not. I almost both sides this thing, and I'm trying
All right.
Anyhow.
Well, given everything that we were talking about, especially with some entertainment or opinion hosts on Fox, going back to the comedy shows though, is there ever such a thing as too far, basically? Like, can the host get it wrong? And
Oh yeah.
you mentioned like, apologizing the next day, but how does I guess that play out?
Okay, so we intentionally left it as a cliffhanger here. So make sure to join us next week as Pat tells us what happens if a comedian gets a story wrong.
Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Dominic Camia.
Music provided by Jake Howitt, research by Laura Rothenbucker.
You can watch and follow us on YouTube.
Or you can listen and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you have any questions or suggestions, we want to hear from you. So leave a comment.
We do check them.
Or reach out to us anytime at laidofandlookingpod@gmail.com.
New episodes every Friday.